2007. My 11th birthday. Truthfully, I don't remember the day itself very well, which, like a few birthdays back then, was held at a laser tag arena that probably doesn't exist anymore. I remember it being a pretty run-down place, with only half the stuff ever really working. I also remember that it had a Neo Geo cabinet out front, and that in later years I would spend the week beforehand playing Alien Hominid on Newgrounds to practice so that I could play Metal Slug without blowing all my change too quickly. But I hardly remember that birthday itself. I certainly don't remember what I asked for. I do know that whatever I asked for, it wasn't what I got. Even as a child, it would have felt a little greedy to ask for that. I don't know how my father scrounged up the money to get a 60-gig PS3 in April of 2007 when it still went for $600. My mom didn't either, and both she and my grandmother assumed that he got the money through gambling, which led to a little tension for a while. I've never actually asked my dad if they were right or not. I had 3 games at first. Resistance Fall of Man, which pretty much every Year 1 PS3 owner had. Also Call of Duty 3, which must have been entirely my dad's idea, given how much of a Greatest Generation fan he was and still is. And then there was... well, you can probably already guess what the third game was. By now, my memories of my first time playing Virtua Fighter 5 are far from photographic. I remember opening the arcade mode. I didn't want to mess with quest mode at first, since I had read in Game Informer, or possibly EGM, that it was pretty involved. And I remember picking a character for the first time. If you've ever been a child playing a fighting game for the first time, you'll know exactly what my rationale was. Hey, this one looks cool. I'll play as them. To 11-year-old me, the character that stuck out the most was Lei Fei, the Shaolin monk. I'm not sure what stuck out to me back then about the scowling bald dude in a robe, but looking back, it was a formative choice. For one, when I saw my first Shaw Brothers Kung Fu movie years later, I was probably predisposed to like it because I unconsciously noted the connection. And for another, by virtue of picking such a, well, frankly weird first main, I began a lifelong obsession with all things unorthodox in fighting games. With my character choice made, I started an arcade mode run. I don't recall exactly how it went, but come on, I was 11 playing my first ever serious fighting game. There's no way I didn't get destroyed. We had a hot summer that year. Not that I noticed much personally. I didn't spend a lot of time outside. I won't pretend that my grind that summer was anything close to scientific. Back then, with widespread internet video being a little over a year old, it wasn't even intuitive for adults to find footage of combos or optimal play. So I just played, and played, and played. Not against people, of course. You may recall that the original PS3 port of VF5 didn't have online play. And none of my friends lived near enough to me for them to come over during the summer, so I couldn't play with them either. I have a brother, but he's never been into fighting games. Not to mention that he was 6 at the time, so he was pretty much out regardless. All I had to play with was the AI. So that's how I played. I pressed buttons. When something worked, I pressed them again. When it didn't, I didn't. Lei Fei is a stance character, which I didn't really understand at the time, but I knew that sometimes, when I pressed buttons, I could then press other, better buttons, and that I knew when I could use the better buttons when Lei Fei was standing differently. From there, I put together a very rudimentary game plan which would never in a million years have worked against a skilled player. Then, after a few arcade runs, I took that game plan to quest mode. By the end of the summer, I had achieved a decently high rank, about halfway through the Dawn ranks, I think. That sounds like a much bigger accomplishment than it is. Quest mode, like most single-player fighting game modes, is all about poking holes in the AI, which pretty much anybody can do with enough time. But back then, it felt like I had really done something. With the end of summer, school resumed. And on a weekend in early autumn, I had my first opportunity to play against a real person. A childhood friend, who had recently started going by his middle name because he thought his first name was, and I quote, too British. That's not relevant to the story, but I felt compelled to bring it up. I didn't pick Lei Fei. It felt unfair to me to use a main that I had played for months against my friend who had never played at all. So without giving much thought to it, I picked another character, one I had never touched before. Jeffrey. I won the first game, which turned out to be our only game that day. Because after the game ended, Jeffrey's victory audio played.
Behold my physique!
And for reasons that still escape me, we thought it was the funniest thing ever. It made us laugh so hard that once we were finished laughing, we didn't pick the game back up. So, that's how my first day playing VF5 with a real person ended. With two uniquely dumb kids, laughing like hyenas after one game. To this day, we still occasionally message each other, "Behold my physique!" To this day. Writing that, I found myself at an impasse. How do you go about putting 17 years into one video? There's no way for me to just list all that's happened in that time without this part of the video sounding like a grocery list and inevitably missing many, many things. I sat in front of this word processor screen for longer than I'd care to admit trying to figure that out. But nothing. Until I went for a walk. Getting up from my chair, I walk out into the living room of a house I didn't start living in until 2011. The first thing I see is the recliner where my grandmother usually sits for most of the day, always with her walker parked nearby. In the years since that autumn day in 2007, she's had cancer twice and lost most of her mobility and a chunk of her memory. When I'm not making videos, I spend much of my day taking care of her. I walk past a wall where, among some other photos, both mine and my little brother's bachelor's degrees are framed. At time of writing, my little brother is out of state getting his master's. I walk past the dining room and take a look out the window into the front yard. Away to the right, out of my field of vision, the family dog is buried. We got her in 2012 and she died in 2022. A whole life lived in a little over half the time that has passed since that autumn day in 2007. Like any house that's been lived in long enough, death hangs in the air. Deaths that have happened and deaths that were just barely avoided by a hair. Another is just around the corner, in the foyer. In 2018, as I was finishing college, my father was diagnosed with bladder cancer. It was discovered early enough to save his life, but late enough that surgery was necessary. Complications in the months afterward led to 3 different incidents of sepsis which destroyed his kidneys. So now he's on home hemodialysis. 4 hours, 4 days a week, sitting in that chair while his blood gets cleaned. Suffice it to say, life is pretty different for him than it used to be. I don't like to editorialize. Really, I don't. But if you need motivation to quit smoking, or to never start in the first place, remember this image. Take a screenshot and make it your phone wallpaper if you want. I could show you a million other things in this house that have the passage of those 17 years etched into them. Good and not so good. But I think I've made my point. I didn't watch the Game Awards this year. Honestly, I don't think I've ever sat down to watch it live in any year. But this year, some friends of mine did, and they posted about it to our group chat while I played Doom. My friends aren't really fighting game fans, and I don't think any of them have played Virtua Fighter once in their lives. But they knew I was. So when they saw the news, they made sure I saw it too. My reaction was much like the other reactions you've probably already seen. As I write this, there's a lot of anticipation in the air. Anticipation and hope. Hope that the game will be good, of course. Hope that the VF community, held together by the sincere conviction of a small group of people for over a decade and a half, will get the shot of life it absolutely deserves. I hope for all of that too, of course. But my deepest hope is something smaller in scale. I hope that once the game comes out, somewhere, maybe a small town nobody who isn't from there knows the name of, some kid opens their birthday present to find it. And that they take it home to play it, and while they don't fully understand the finer details of it, they have fun. Then they keep playing. Maybe they invite some friends over and they don't quite get it either, but they have fun too. Then 17 years pass, and looking back, that kid realizes that in many ways that they didn't realize at the time, Virtua Fighter made them who they are today. That it taught them patience, diligence, sportsmanship, creativity. That in a way, it set them on the long road to adulthood. That they would be a very different person without it. Probably for the worse. If that happens once, to one kid anywhere in the world, then, to me at least, it'll have been worth the wait.